Greetings and welcome to Voices from Albion, the Magnetic Minstrel podcast. My name is Richard McPherson and I'll be your host tonight. Settle down with some toasty black buns, or a warm glass of some Scotch milk, and sit back while I tell you the tales of the lost Albion Empire and the musical saga of Magnetic Minstrel. Episode 8, First Tour of Magnetic Minstrel. Chapter 1, Strike the Match. Part 1, Stranded in the Future. After Aniran's traumatic return to the modern world, he tried for weeks to break the binding spell cast by the archdruid Vandrel that had ejected him from Albion, only to no avail. No matter how he played the time songs, he could not conjure the window to the ancient realm. His bandmates tried to be conciliatory, yet Aniran could not put down that Callistra was alone back in Albion. Finally, once it became apparent that he would not be able to return until the binding was broken, he was left with no other choice than to accept that he was marooned in the future and try to make the best of it. It was the counsel of Vivian Witherspoon, ever the voice of reason, that now was the time to tell the tales of his travels in Albion to the modern world. So, the members of Magnetic Minstrel sat down and began composing the songs that would become the musical litany of his adventures in the forgotten realm of Albion. Part 2, The Vision of a Solitary Minstrel. Once they had composed the music in verse, Aniran found himself wondering how he could actually bring a more visual element to his sojourns. This was solved when the band began to weave the magical musical strings of the College of Bards into the music itself. Using the strain of summoning, Aniran found that they could summon images from his travels and project them into the modern world. In their first live performance at Imperial Ranch, the imagery from Albion hovered above the stage, revealing Albion in fantastic detail, showing his journeys throughout Albion as well as his building of Stonehenge and his reunion with Callistra. In addition, there are also detailed images of Albion preparing for war and the retaking of Castle Dŵr. What was perhaps the most striking element of all was the ascension of the Star of Albion above Castle Dŵr at the height of the siege by Imperial forces. Once the band witnessed the magnificent display, they all agreed that they now must show the modern world the visions of Albion. It was time to go on the road. Chapter 2, Light the Fire. Part 1, The musical journey begins. After weeks of preparation, the band finally struck out for London. The wealth of precious gems gifted them by Emperor Arcturus Pendragon during their initial sojourn in Albion provided for their journey handsomely, yet the question in all their minds had been where would they play their first show. This was answered in a surprising fashion. They had originally hoped to play at the Download Festival in Northern England, yet once they got to London they were presented with an unexpected opportunity. The country had been thrown into turmoil by the fallout from Brexit, or England's departure from the European Union. A musical benefit had been arranged at Wembley Stadium, featuring many of the top names in modern music. When the Rolling Stones plane developed engine trouble and had to set down in Reykjavik, there was an empty slot in the program, and the benefit promoters were desperate to find somebody to fill the vacancy on such short notice. With Herculean effort, the band made the troublesome journey from South London to Wembley Stadium and set up in record time. Throughout this, in all of their minds was the unanswered question: would the images that they had produced at Imperial Ranch actually project inside the massive stadium? That question was answered quickly when the lights dimmed around the stadium and they began to play the Solitary Minstrel. When the opening image of Castle Dŵr projected into the heart of the stadium in massive detail, The audience was spellbound. Throughout the next hour, the endless parade of images filled the heart of the great stadium, until at last they came to the end, where the forces of Albion lay siege to Castle Dor. The air above the stadium was filled with a war of wizards and warriors against the might of the Archdruid's dragon horde. When the Star of Albion climbed into the sky to detonate in a fiery supernova above the roof of the arena, the stadium fell into utter darkness. At first it was so quiet you could have heard a pin drop. Only then did the audience erupt into a reckless pandemonium with screaming and cheering that could be heard in downtown London miles away. The band came back for 3 encores to a highly enthusiastic audience before retreating to the comfort of their farmhouse outside South London to await what would come next. Part 2. Conjuring the Realm of Albion. The next morning brought only accolades and amazement from the world press. No one could even guess at how they achieved their miraculous imagery that graced their show. Some suspected it was some kind of breakthrough holographic technology, while others attempted to rationalize what they had seen and failed miserably. Whatever the case, the band was immediately flooded with offers, and the first tour of Magnetic Minstrel began to take shape. Over the next few days, they would head north to Edinburgh, where they played a hastily improvised music festival to replace the Download Festival that had been cancelled due to torrential rains. Accompanied by a glorious retinue of bagpipers, they captured the imagination of Scotland and indeed the rest of the world. Next came Dublin and a cadre of Celtic harpers that accompanied Aniran throughout the show. What ended up stealing the show was a surprised ghostly spectre of Queen Danu that appeared to bless Aniran with her benediction before blowing a kiss to the assembled audience and vanishing into the night. The next 2 shows sealed the fate of Magnetic Minstrel as they played Cardiff and finally an open-air concert beneath the Eiffel Tower in Paris. It seemed that all of Paris had turned out to see their show, and the grounds beneath the Eiffel Tower were jammed with people, and the rooftops were dotted with hundreds of thousands of people across the city. When the Star of Albion climbed above the steel tower to explode in its fearsome culmination, Paris came alive with its passionate praise. Over the next several weeks, their firestorm of success only grew as their audience swelled almost beyond belief. At the last, they were invited to return to London to headline a second Brexit benefit amid a politically charged atmosphere, as the current government of England was under fire for its continuing failure of their Brexit strategy and the massive cuts to social programs to keep the government afloat. Fearing for the fallout from the benefit, the members of Magnetic Minstrel were denied entry visas to England, and the benefit was cancelled. In light of its cancellation, Aniran took to the airways from Paris to challenge the government and send its message to the people that they must gather at Wembley Stadium anyway, and that the show would go on in spite of the government's attempts to quash it. When millions of people began to fill the streets of London and marching towards the stadium, the government had no other choice than to relent. Their final defiant act was to issue a gag order that the band could not say anything regarding Brexit or the upcoming referendum by Her Majesty's government. When the band did take the stage for their encore at the show's end, they did so wearing Guy Fawkes masks to play the 1812 overture to an overwhelmingly passionate audience that cried V for victory as the band left the stage. After that, they returned to Imperial Ranch to contemplate the next step in their musical plans, and Aniran's hope for a return to Albion. Chapter 3. Fan the Flames. Part 1. In the halls of High Brazil. In the wake of Aniran's return to Albion and his reunion with Calestra, he eventually returned to the modern world. Only this time he was not alone. After the events in Albion that led to the discovery that the Archdruid had secreted himself inside the transdimensional mirror in sunken Atlantis, Aniran and Calestra and the magical officers of Albion undertook their first effort to confront Vandrel in his secret lair inside the charred ruins of the crystalline towers of High Brazil. At the height of their opening confrontation, the Archdruid attempted to eject Aniran from Albion as he had previously done. This time, however, he was unsuccessful in separating the two lovers. Calestra rushed into Aniran's arms as Vandrel wove his dark spell to cast Aniran out, and together they were expelled into the modern world. It was Calestra's wondrous introduction to the future world, and she immediately became enchanted by its endless possibilities and the magic they would weave together as she took her place at Aniran's side. Part 2. The Lover's Honeymoon. Across the lands of the Middle and Far East, Magnetic Minstrel renewed its musical journey to critical acclaim. There was endless rampant speculation as to how they are able to conjure the images that grace their show, yet none were able to pierce the magic. The crowds became so massive at each show that the band was eventually forced to build a performance platform in the ocean that they had towed to the cities where they played wherever possible. As for Aniran and Calestra, it was a blissful time together as he introduced her to the wonders of the modern world. Whether it was hot air ballooning above Dubai and the sands of Saudi Arabia, or an enchanted evening in the shadow of a Taj Mahal in India, the magic between them seemed to grow by the day. It was only when the unsettling dreams began to haunt them after their return from one of their journeys to Albion that they heard the summons of the dragons from the ancient world that reached out into the modern day. Uncertain of the portents of such dark omens, they were keenly aware of what they saw in their communal dreams. It was the end of Albion and the flight of its dragons into the lands of Cathay in the wake of its destruction. As the band finished its Far East tour and took a short break before continuing on the next leg of their journey across Australia and Africa, Aniran and Calestra were summoned back to Albion for another confrontation with Vandrel and the awakening of Calestra's role as regent of the earth gifted to her by Queen Danu upon her ascension into the heavens. Chapter 4. Ignite the World. Part 1. Preparing for the final confrontation. When they returned to Albion, Aniran and Calestra joined with the magical officers of Albion to voyage to sunken Atlantis, where they would move an expeditionary force into the towers of High Brazil to face the Archdruid one final time. Continually hounded by the Archdruid's creations throughout the dark halls of the submarine realm, they nonetheless succeeded in driving Vandrel back until at last they were ready to confront the Archdruid inside the hellish realm of a trans-dimensional mirror. Yet at the final moment they were driven away as Vandrel unleashed all of his powers against them. Calestra was forced to draw on her newfound powers as a regent of the earth to protect them from the Archdruid's onslaught. This caused a breakdown in Aniran's connection to Albion, and the two of them were expelled back into the modern world as a result. As they rejoined the band in Australia, Calestra began to notice that her power was becoming more difficult to control in the modern world, and as the band began its parade of performances, was not without consequence and some striking side effects. Part 2. The Regent of the Earth. It soon became apparent that Calestra was able to draw on the Earth's magnetic field and manifest it with some amazing results. Whether it was the summoning of the Aurora Australis or the Southern Lights across Australia, or an endless battery of powerful thunderstorms and magnificent displays of lightning across southern Africa, her abilities grew in power with each passing day. As the band continued its journey into the upper part of Africa, they were to enter the darkest days of their tour. They were pursued by terrorists bent on derailing the band's progress and came under attack with such ferocity that they thought they might have to cancel the tour. Only when they had a final showdown in the remote city of Timbuktu and Calestra conjured a great whirlwind did the attacks finally abate. As the band finished their journey across the upper part of Africa, which culminated in Cairo under the shadow of the pyramids on the final leg of that part of the tour, Aneurin and Calestra were called back to Albion for what would prove to be their final confrontation with Vandro. In a final cataclysmic clash, the Archdruid was sealed within the trans-dimensional mirror, and Aneurin and Calestra were hurled back into the modern day. This would begin the final leg of Magnetic Minstrel's world tour as they journeyed through the Americas. As they traveled, it was becoming more and more obvious that Calestra's powers were reaching the limit of her control. Freak weather phenomenon followed them from city to city with tempests, whirlwinds, tornadoes, lightning and hailstorms manifesting at every stop across South America. Finally, as they crossed into Central America and Mexico, their shows concluded every night with some powerful meteorological event. This culminated as they moved into the United States with earthquakes, tornadoes, blizzards, typhoons, and dust storms. In every case, though, Calestra found she was beginning to be able to control the phenomenon and eventually bring them under control. In the last show of their tour, the band was in Miami as a gigantic hurricane began to form in the Caribbean and raced towards Miami. As the band performed for the last time with the massive spectre of the monumental hurricane bearing down on them, Calestra used every ounce of her power to bring the fearsome tempest under control. As the storm broke apart into several smaller storms, it overwhelmed the performance platform, and the others in the band fled to safety in the final moments. Aneurin and Calestra were translated back to Albion at the last moment as the performance platform sank beneath them and they were caught up in the great whirlwind that followed. This has been Voices from Albion, the Magnetic Minstrel podcast. I hope that you have enjoyed the show and will tune in next time for the next episode. If you want to know more about the Lost Albion Empire, please go to starofalbion.co.uk, and if you are curious about the band Magnetic Minstrel, please go to magneticminstrel.co.uk. So until next time, stay safe in this uncertain world, my fine lads and lasses, and fare thee well. Voices from Albion, the Magnetic Minstrel podcast, is a production of Keramora Audio. Copyright Richard McPherson, 2020. All rights reserved.